to the Geula Mamas show. This is the place for everything pregnancy, birth, and babies with emunah and a whole lot of love. I am Tivi Goodman. I am a midwife, doula, mommy, safta, and host of the Geula Mamas show. And I am joined in live person today by Dr. Lilach Saperstein. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
So exciting. So Lilach is an audiologist. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am an audiologist, and what I do is I help people understand their hearing loss, and help parents and guide them through the journey of hearing loss with their children. I'm the host of the All About Audiology podcast, and on the podcast we talk all about those different topics, and with a big focus on advocacy and knowing what to ask for, knowing what questions you need to come in with, knowing what resources are available to you. So very similar to a lot of the things that you're doing with birth, with audiology, with hearing and hearing loss.
And it's a really interesting, I highly recommend it. I've learned so much. Thank God that is not one of the things that we're dealing with, but I've still learned so much just from listening. I listen to it because it's interesting. But if you or anyone you know is dealing with hearing loss, absolutely. It's entertaining, it's interesting, informative, really, really highly recommended from personal experience. Now, Lilach, you just made Aliyah.
Yes, right? I made Aliyah in the summer, and thank you. In that transition, I found that, I didn't have my job that I had in New York. I was working as an educational audiologist in a school for the deaf. So there I was in charge of everyone's devices and doing a lot of testing in the school for the deaf. But the best part of that job was all the meetings with the parents, IEP meetings and service meetings and intakes. And every time that I would meet a parent and the family and the children and whoever else was involved, I saw even more highlighted that every child is this whole system, this whole family, and every environment, all the factors that go into it play a huge, huge role in the child's success and how they're doing with their hearing, which is just this small portion, but it really, gives you the big picture of everything. And that's also, I think, why people enjoy the show, even if they don't have a child with a hearing loss, because we really touch on all different topics, like how do we hear everyone? How can we use our hearing in different ways in our life to support us? And we're going to talk about that more during how you can use your hearing during pregnancy, to help you with that.
And how your unborn baby or newborn baby hears is a fascinating, really interesting topic. So you are living now in Kiryat Shmuel, where I'm living, just north of Haifa.
Yay.
And you have three adorable little girls.
Yes.
They're so cute. What are their ages again?
5, almost 3, 1.5.
Okay. So it's actually a really big deal that you took the time out to come and talk with us. Because it sounds like you have your hands busy.
Yeah.
And Lilach has prepared a present for everyone, but we'll tell you about that at the end of the show.
Stay tuned.
Very exciting. All right, so let's start. I love to try to go organized here, okay? So when we are expecting a baby, before the baby's even born, they are already hearing, right? Can you tell us something about that? How does that work? They're in fluid.
Right. So they are suspended in fluid, and sound does travel differently through air versus through fluid, through water. But it still does reach, especially the low frequency sounds. And within our body, when we make our sounds that come out of our mouth, they're also reverberating, coming back into the body through the skull, and because our breath is really what's supporting our speech. So everything is connected. And so there is evidence that the baby is able to hear the mother's voice, and also voices from outside can get through, especially low, like bass or the lower parts of speech and sounds.
So I have heard that. I've heard that because male voices have a lower pitch, I guess it would be, that the baby can hear the father's voice even better, or at least as well as the mother's voice, even though it's within the same body.
Yeah, the ear is one of the earlier things to develop embryonically. So that's one of these when I start thinking about it, I just really get this sense of awe and wonder. And it's why I love talking about how this part of our body works, because our hearing is just amazing. There's so many different parts of the pathway that have to go right. And then I think about how I have a doctorate in this field and know a lot of the details, and yet it's just the ear, just one part of everything that we do and our bodies. And then childbirth, every time I was pregnant, it would just blow my mind. When you read these emails, what's going on? What's happening inside of you?
As the baby's developing.
At
what time in development does the baby begin to hear more or less, as far as we know?
Right at the end of the first trimester.
Wow, that's really early.
Yeah. And then different things develop, throughout, but that's when the major components are formed. Mm-hmm.
I was at one of my favorite births many, many years ago, and there were some complications afterwards, and the mom wasn't able to nurse the baby right away, and the baby was crying, and a bunch of different things were going on. What I loved about it was the father had been outside, and he had been saying Tehillim, and he had not come into the room. I was there, and her sister was there, and I was this last minute doula that had been called. I didn't even know the family at all. And I had heard him outside saying Tehillim. From time to time I would give him an update, but he was really disconnected. And after the birth, this little baby boy, he was crying, and I said what I had learned. I was hoping it was true. I said, the baby knows your voice, and if you can just hold him and say to him, just like you've been saying the whole time, he's going to recognize you as his father. So he did, and this baby just calmed down, completely melted, and he continued saying to him. And then I went for a follow-up visit about 2 days later, and she said that he had been very disconnected the whole pregnancy, and now after that experience, he was saying this Tehillim and just putting the baby to sleep all the time, and rocking him and talking with him and changing his diaper, even taking a real active role, just because of that connection with voice. So that always, one of the things that I love about, pregnancy, birth, and aside from the millions of miracles, I love how you can connect more. It's like you rebirth yourself as a whole new person, and yourself as a whole new family. Mm-hmm. And sometimes after birth, things can be really challenging. And whenever I find a way to bring things even more tightly together, it just gets me really, really excited. So.
And what in that story, you're saying a few things played a role to that. The holding, that's, the touch, which is such an important way that we connect. And then hearing is it's one of those fabulous things where you can connect, but from a distance.
That's true.
And can I go into my little dive here?
Okay. We are doing this all about audiology.
Great.
So go for it.
The thing about hearing, that's just one of those blow your mind moments, is that it actually is a form of touching, or a way to connect to someone in a physical sense. Because we think, oh, I'm just putting sound waves into the air, I'm speaking, your ear is catching it. But what that means is that I'm physically moving air particles with my voice. They are moving in a specific frequency, specific waves, a whole complex nature of what the sound is, and that's hitting your eardrum just right, giving you that movement of the little bones behind the eardrum, vibrating them in just this way, and then they're going into your cochlea. Wow, the cochlea is like the most complex processing device, transducer, changing from acoustic, like physical movement of particles, into electrical signals that are going up to your nerve and then being processed by the brain. So this whole system is going, like the auditory system starts from the outer ear where we're collecting the sounds, the middle ear, the inner ear, up to the brain, through the nerve. That whole system has so many different parts, different stations. Every single one needs to be moving the message along correctly, codifying it and making sure it's the right frequency. Like all these different things are happening. And then once you get to the brain, it has to match what just came in with meaning. So then you come in with your context from on top and you say, oh, I know what these words mean because I have knowledge of language. And then you can understand what was being said. This whole system, it's complicated, it's complex. There's a lot of places where it can break down. But the fact is that if someone is talking to you and you say they really touched me, their words really moved me, that is literal, that's true.
So what you're saying is when I'm speaking,
Mm-hmm.
like you know those pictures from grade school, right, of the sound waves going out further and further. They're touching you, going to your ear and moving that. So you actually are touching
Yes.
somebody as we're speaking now.
Yeah.
So then, okay, wait. So now my question. So when it's recorded, okay, because everyone else is going to hear us digitally.
Yeah.
How does sound come out of my computer device, and how do I hear it? Because there's no breath to move that sound. How does that work?
Very good question. There is, so microphones have a little diaphragm inside. It's a very thin membrane. And when you speak into a microphone, that moves and vibrates just like our eardrums move. And then what it's doing is it's converting from acoustic movement of air into electric, and then coding that as zeros and ones in the computer. And then when it's giving it out to a receiver, a speakerphone is putting it out, it's doing the reverse of that. It's going from electric, from zeros and ones, to tell it at what rate to move the speaker.
So that's actually moving the air.
And that's actually moving the air. Why you could put your hands on a big speaker at a DJ party. And
it's moving. I mean, it
but that's happening in every microphone you have. A microphone in your phone. It's teeny, tiny, but that's what's going on. So the fact that we've been able to, electrically, replicate what's happening in the body is another one of those crazy things.
That is pretty crazy. Yeah, wow. I kind of have a million more questions, but then we'll go into it'll be all about technology instead of it's like I see what you're saying. You could study for years, which you've done, and you're kind of just scraping the surface. So which makes sense, which is what I feel about birth. It's the same thing. I mean, there's so many miracles. The way the human body works is just absolutely amazing. So okay, so now we have pregnancy. Okay, baby, amazingly, end of first trimester is starting to hear. That's pretty crazy. One of the things that I tried out with my last pregnancy was singing a certain song every night at my bedtime to see if it would help my baby go to sleep. I don't know if it worked or didn't work. Have you ever heard anything about that?
Yeah. I mean, we can try all the things. However, if they're going to work or not is another question. But the thing is that it also made a difference for you. Whether or not it made a difference for the baby, then when you sang that song, you were probably back in that space, being calmer and
maybe,
coming down, maybe, right?
I don't know.
And so, our brains are developing all the time in babies at a crazy exponential rate in the beginning, first 3 years. So they are a sponge. They are taking everything in. Yeah, I'm sure that we know that starts in.
Well, also with language, I know that it's so fascinating how different people can speak. We can say "cha" or whatever it may be, depending on language that they heard. I think in the first year is the most intense time, and even when you learn a second language later on, it's much more difficult to get those certain sounds. Now, no one sat and taught the baby how to make the resh sound or the chet sound or whatever it may be in different languages. And we just absorb it through our hearing, creating these patterns that we know. I'm always just amazed. Like I hear, in Israel, I hear little kids going around and going, Reish. I have no idea what that sounded like, right? And I'm like, who taught them? Can they teach me how to do that? My kids have tried to teach me how to do it.
0 to 6 months. That's when, first. Okay, so there's a study where they basically the results of the study are that children are born with the capacity for any sound language production. Okay. So if you take a baby before 6 months and put them in a different cultural language context, you take a baby born in one country and put them in Japan, then they will learn all the different sounds and not be able to discriminate between L and R, things like that, because that's not meaningful in Japanese. That doesn't have phonetic context. So if that's what they've been exposed to in the first 6 months, then they won't show a preference, a differentiation between those. But if they were in a different culture, then they would have, like you're saying, maybe not have any awareness of the cha sound if it's not present in the different language. So
I'm wondering it might even start before they're born.
Yeah.
Also, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Environment is huge. But okay, it's not only 0 to 6, 0 to 3 is critical language, and even 0 to 5. And then in terms of learning a new language, you can even go all the way up to about puberty. Right around 11, 12 is when, if you start to learn after that, then it's difficult and it's a second language and you have to really put effort into it. But if you, move to a different country before that time, 8, 9, 10, then you could probably master native proficiency. But anyway.
Yeah, I do find it just fascinating how just hearing it. Like I could hear people saying the Israeli Reish all day, all night. I could put on tapes of it. It will never teach me how to produce that with my mouth, right, in my throat. Whereas somebody did give me a little tutorial, so I've been practicing it a little bit, but no one's teaching the baby. Something goes on between the auditory and speaking, some translation of this is how you're going to move your mouth and your throat. It's pretty crazy.
So the good news is that we have neuroplasticity, which means our brains can learn. They're not fixed and that's it. You can't change. We can always rewire what's going on. However, it gets much more difficult as you grow and as those pathways. So you think about it like if there's a field of grass and people keep taking that shortcut, then they're going to keep taking the same shortcut over and over. 100 people go on there, that grassy little lane is going to become muddy and downtrodden. And so it's possible that anywhere in that field you could make new places, but then you'd have to do that over and over again.
And keep up with it.
Yeah. So our babies, they are taking it all in, and they're very plastic. Their brains are very able to take in new things. Yeah.
It's amazing.
And actually, the process of a little bit about neurodevelopment is that what's happening in the neurons is actually pruning, taking out. So we're born with like basically the potential for everything, and then the brain says, oh, but this is important and this is what's coming at me. So then those parts are given more attention, more resources, and the other parts kind of fall away.
Okay, so we're born with all this potential for everything, like kol haTorah kulo, and then we filter it according.
And we have to, because we need to be able to speak and focus on
right? Because if you have everything, you have nothing basically, right? It's amazing. Okay, so now, Bezrat Hashem, your baby's born. It's a healthy baby, and you're either at home birth or in the hospital. We're going to test the baby's hearing. What's done at that time? Okay,
so one of the very important first screenings that goes on, they're going to screen lots of things for a new baby. They take a stick from their, a pinprick blood test from their foot, their ankle, and do all sorts of testing for different disorders. That we're very grateful that we have these things, because in the past, we wouldn't know what was going on, what happened to a baby 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And now they could say right away, let's test this, so we flag these babies for different heart things and different, it's just, I'm so grateful that we're in this time, because knowledge is power. And when you know what's happening, you know how to deal with it, and you know what's coming. So one of those things is the hearing screening. And the hearing screening is an automatic test. A little earphone is put in the baby's ear. They're so tiny. Baby's sleeping, doesn't need to do anything. And basically the way that test works is that a sound goes into the baby's ear, and the healthy cochlea will produce back a little echo, an echo that needs to be filtered and processed with this machinery, but it can be picked up to know if the cochlea is functioning, if they're hearing. And this is a very good test, but like all medical tests, it has percentages of time when it is getting either a false positive or a false negative. So a baby can not pass this test and still be hearing. So reasons why they wouldn't pass would be their ear is really, really curvy, and the sounds from that test didn't quite make it all the way in. Or they still had fluid in their ear from the birth, like debris. Or there was lots of noise in the room, even though they control for that when they do the test. It could be one of the reasons. The equipment could be malfunctioning. All right, so if a baby doesn't pass this, there's a chance that they are hearing. That's why we always repeat it. We try to repeat it again before they're discharged, or else within the first 2 weeks of life to come back to an audiologist or the hospital to get it rescreened. There is a possibility that someone doesn't pass that and they are deaf. And that's an important thing to know, because
birds are traveling through the porch. Hi, birds. Yes. So the baby getting tested for hearing.
And it is important to say that that's a possible outcome, because 90% of children who are born deaf are born to hearing parents. And born to hearing parents who have no family history, no birth, no risk factors, it is a possible outcome. It's rare, but it does happen. And there's a problem that happens when there's so much reassurance. Oh, the baby didn't pass because of fluid, the baby didn't pass because of this, that it isn't even put in as an option. Actually, one of the options of not passing is that the baby can't hear. And even just to say, that's a possibility, we need to retest this, we need to confirm it. But that shouldn't be like something that we're hiding from parents or something that you don't want to scare them. Well, I mean, it's not about scaring, but it's about knowing. We need to know what's going on, because if that's the case, let's go, early intervention. What are we doing?
Right. Well, I would imagine the same way you're saying, that if language starts for first 6 months, first year, so whatever intervention you're doing for the baby, be it like there's cochlear ear, what is that called?
Implants.
Implants. Right. That helps the baby hear in a different sort of way, right?
Right.
You want to do that as early as possible, or sign language or whatever it may be. You want to do that as early as possible so the baby's hearing at their most neuroplastic. Would that be the word?
Yes,
neuroplastic time period, so they can learn the easiest?
Okay, so first step is detection. Detecting, you know, which children do we need to be watching and what kind of things need to happen for them. So it is overwhelming. It is a crazy time. Having a baby is, whoa, through the roof. Everything is changing hormonally, family structure, like everything's going on. However, the mother's birth experience was, that's a whole story. And now you're dealing with the baby and their experience. There's a lot of moving parts, but I do think that there needs to be more education about why this screening is important, and that if people don't pass, they don't just brush it off and say, oh, we'll come back, you know, when they turn 2. And now we've had 2 years where was this child? So that's what used to happen in the past before we had the screening. And that's when children who were deaf were identified, because they weren't speaking at a year, year and a half, 2 years, and then it's like, oh, actually they have some sort of hearing loss. If they were totally deaf, maybe it was noticed before because, you know, fire trucks and things were going by and they were oblivious. So that's how it would be identified. But now that we have early identification, it's made a huge difference in outcomes for children, because we can get hearing aids.
Because you're saying even a partial loss can be detected, and you can do things.
Exactly.
And the earliest possible, take care of it. Worst comes, like if it was a waste of your time, then it wasn't a waste of your time, right? Like if you go through and you suspect something's wrong, and then the baby's fine, and you just wasted, you know, appointments and schlepping. I've heard people say, "Oh, I just wasted so much time over this." That's the best thing. Then you won. Then you know everything's okay, right?
When you look at it from a population perspective, 5 or 10, I don't know the numbers statistically, but you know, those people who wasted their time, quote unquote, you are the people that we're inconveniencing in order to detect these other children and helping them so much. So you can think of it as a big chesed you're doing for your neighbor.
It is a chesed, but it's also relaxing to know that there's actually, that your child is hearing correctly.
Right.
You know, I mean, how often do you get that sort of confirmation? And if your baby's born at home or in a birth center, we also do testing. The testing's a little bit different, but definitely there will be testing done to make sure that the baby is hearing right away. And as a parent, you can also look for signs. If you suspect anything's funny, get them checked. You know, worst comes to worst, it's just, but that is really important to remember, that every day that goes by, every month that goes by, every year that goes by can really make a big difference if the baby is not hearing quite correctly, because of the neuroplasticity. When they're little.
We do want to do the first screening, you know, 24 to 48 hours before they leave the hospital. Like you're saying, if there's a birth at home or in the car, like in my case, my 3rd baby was born in the car.
But that was in the car on the way to the hospital.
It was on the way
have all the.
So we still have the hospital stay. But anyway,
that must be a fun story for another time.
That was a fun story.
Should we do a show on babies born in transit?
I'm in.
Okay. We'll think about that.
Follow up.
Yes.
Okay. So I try to do it as soon as possible. That's so that we can test everyone. And it's called a universal screening, meaning every baby born, we want to test them as much as possible.
And it doesn't hurt the baby at all.
Not at all.
Blood test is
not at all. They don't feel a thing.
In your bed.
But if not, then it can be done, you know, anytime after, at the first pediatrician appointment, at 2 months, whatever, you know, just to try and get it checked off as one of the things that have to happen.
I'm wondering, what are the reasons? What are the most common reasons? Because deafness, like you said, it's a lot of different reasons, and there's partial deafness. There's all kinds of different things. What would be kind of the reasons that somebody might be born deaf versus have hearing loss later in life?
Right. Okay, so 50% of the cases are hereditary, genetic causes, and 50% of the cases are non-hereditary, non-genetic. So many children, actually in the Ashkenazi community, there's a common gene mutation called connexin 26, and that's a common cause of hearing loss among Ashkenazi Jews. But there are so many different genes that control for hearing that actually there's, a myriad of genetic reasons why a baby could be born deaf.
So before we move on, is that Ashkenazi gene one of the genes they test for in Doria Sharon? Because it's not life-threatening.
I don't think that it's on their panel, but it can be tested in a specific,
especially if someone knows that they have
yeah.
Deafness and hearing loss in their family.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that someone would just be born with.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the other reasons would be any other additional factors that are affecting the baby's development in utero. There are different craniofacial syndromes that affect the way the skull is formed, and part of the cochlea. Cochlea is in the temporal bone of the skull. It's inside of a bony casing. Mm-hmm. So that's affected. And so there can be different causes. And there's also other syndromes that can be related. So an example of that is charge, which is also affecting the heart. So it has cardio implications. It also has hearing. There's other syndromes that affect the kidneys and the hearing. And this is why we really want to identify those children early. Because if a hearing loss is found, that gives us a question of, should we continue to do further testing to also test their vision for Usher syndrome? Should we also test their cardiovascular health? Should we also test their nephrology? Like, everything is going to fit in.
So there might be something that was not picked up on a regular screening.
Right.
But because you notice the hearing loss, you realize there's a connection there.
Yeah. Okay. So hearing loss does exist just as hearing loss. That's the only thing. Everything else is typical with this child. But other times it's not. It can be a constellation of things, and then the hearing could be your clue to look for those things. So part of the things that happens is genetic testing. Not for everyone, but many people do it.
So from about like the percentage of children, let's say, that are completely deaf, approximately how many of them were born that way, and approximately how many of them acquired it through something else, which I don't know what it could be. But
okay, so I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I would say that deafness, complete, no hearing at all, would most likely be from birth, whereas hearing loss can develop and get gradually worse throughout childhood from different reasons. And there also, what we haven't talked about yet, are reasons that a child might have a temporary hearing loss from having ear infections and fluid in the ears. And those cases are very important to follow up with audiology, with ENT, in order to see if you can help with tubes or antibiotics or any other kind of medicine or anything else. Natural also, like different ways to deal with it. Because if a child has a temporary hearing loss that's almost, that's not being addressed, that's really going to have implications for them, because everyone thinks that they're hearing just fine. And last week they were hearing just fine, but they actually are walking around totally underwater. Everything is murky just when they need to develop speech and language. And
they don't know how to say, something's bothering me, I can't hear well. You don't even as an adult, when we're not hearing well, sometimes maybe you're more aware of it. But I can be going around, and it isn't until I'm just annoyed at everyone. Oh, I haven't been hearing well lately, and not even realize that right away. So for sure, a child is not going to be able to express that.
It's very, not funny, maybe ironic, that sometimes adults will come in with an ear infection or something that's going on with their ear that's so painful. They are beside themselves, and they have teeny tiny bit of hearing loss, but it's affecting their day. They can't hear the phone right. Everything's muffled. They're in pain. They can't hear right, and they're just irritated. And then you start to see how your 2-year-old is behaving. It's very bothersome. It really is disorienting also, especially if it's not equal. So you don't know where sounds are coming from, because we need both of our ears to orient us in space
equally. That's like if you're walking on one short leg and one long leg.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense.
So you don't know where people are coming from. Everyone just keeps calling your name, and because if you have a hearing loss, then they need to yell in order for you to hear. So by the time they said, "Shlomi, Shlomi, Shlomi," now everybody's always yelling at you. Why is everyone thinking you're not paying attention? It's very difficult to see.
I have a relative that always says, "The kids are ignoring me." I'm like, when you call a child and they're ignoring you, they hear you and they're ignoring you. They're doing something more interesting. When you call a child and they don't come and they haven't budged or anything, they probably didn't hear you.
Right.
So did you not speak loudly? You know, were you there, or were they absorbed in it, or do they have a hearing loss? Like, are they not hearing
Don't
you?
do the test when you're saying, come clean your room. Do the test when you're saying, come get ice cream.
Come get ice cream.
And if they come get ice cream, then that's a good way to find out.
That makes sense. That's a good point there. And it must be a lot more common, because now that I'm thinking, I know a lot of people whose kids have had tubes in their ears.
Yeah. We have a whole episode on this, all about audiology, episode
Great.
15 or 14. I don't know, you'll have to see.
Okay.
And yeah, tubes, ear infections, fluid in the ears is one of the most common ailments of early childhood. And it accounts for, I don't know, 75% of doctor visits, like something crazy like that.
Wow.
So it's very important to be aware of. And then that's the thing about audiology, is people might not have any interaction with audiology, not know what an audiologist is, and not know who to go to. Just a big reason why I'm trying to put all of this out there.
Yeah.
That your ENT, ear, nose, and throat specialist doctor works closely with audiologists to make this whole, all your advocates, your whole team.
And it also makes sense, matching with what we were saying about the neuroplasticity, is that if you suspect your child has this hearing loss and they need to get tubes, I'm sure there's a lot of appointments and follow-up and maybe antibiotics and all these things, just to do it. Don't drag your heels. Do it as quickly as you can, because that's depriving of that really rich time to be hearing and to be gaining language skills, which I'm sure, you know, if you have a kid who spent years perhaps, you know, halfway underwater, they might be now in 5th grade and maybe having a reading problem or something like that. And it's processing, right? It's based on what happened when they were little. So I know with one of my kids, it wasn't a hearing thing, but in Sparton, so he was like 2. And the teacher was saying, you need to get this checked, you need to get this checked. And she handed me, she's like, I even printed the papers for you. She handed me like a big stack of papers. Okay, maybe it was like 20 papers.
Okay.
But it was all in Hebrew. And even if it was in English, it's filling it out. It's all of his history. It's a million things. It's a million appointments. And the first time, I think I just like passive aggressively lost the papers that she gave me.
Yeah, and you know what? That's very honest of you, and it really can be overwhelming.
It's very overwhelming.
Especially when you're not noticing a problem. Like when someone else is noticing it, and you're like, I don't know if they're right.
No problem.
Right?
It really did take me to realize there was a problem. Exactly. And then I got the papers, and then I encouraged other people to do the papers. I know it's a lot of papers, just do it right away. And so we're gonna say, okay, with hearing loss, it's much more important than we knew a few minutes ago. 30 minutes ago, we did not know how important this was.
Very important for language, for connection, for all these different things. Now, I also have a whole separate rant. I have about 4 episodes on this whole unit about cochlear implants. Because cochlear implants, you might know about them from these videos that go around Facebook. Yeah. Where you see these beautiful babies' eyes just light up and they're laughing and wow, they heard something. Those activation day videos, they're beautiful, they're inspiring. And it is a miracle that we have this whole other surgical option in order to be able to have access to sound. But what a lot of people don't know about the cochlear implant is that it's an incredibly long, drawn-out, difficult process before and after. And it requires a lot of rehabilitation to learn how to use the device in order to hear with it. And the process before is many, many rounds of testing, imaging, like getting a CT scan or an MRI, a major surgery with general anesthesia for several hours. Wow. So it's not this kind of, you know, turn on a switch, oh, a child is born deaf, cochlear implant. That could be the answer, but it's not easy, and it's not quick, and it's most certainly not cheap. So, and you know, insurance is very expensive, not everything's covered, et cetera, et cetera. So
that's beforehand. If somebody really wants to know all about audiology, I'm sure just look up cochlear and they'll find it. You're very good at keywords. But just in a very small nutshell. So it's a major surgery. There's a lot of testing beforehand. It's expensive. What happens afterwards, though? I mean, all that could be worth it if, like you said, you flip a switch and the kid can hear.
Right. So that's very rare that they should have such a beautiful reaction, and why those videos go viral, because they are rare. Yeah. Most of the time, either the child won't hear anything or have any reaction, or that they will cry. They don't like it. They're like, oh, it's disoriented. It's scary. Yeah. So it's,
but they would get used to after a little while.
They do, right? So over time,
are they hearing when? I don't know how it works at all, but when they do the cochlear ear implant, is the child hearing like we hear? I mean, what are they hearing?
No, they do not hear like we hear, because we, like you're saying, have been hearing for years throughout our whole development of our brain, making sense of all this incoming sound.
Okay.
What happens with the cochlear implant is that sounds are, again, transferred from acoustic into electric. That's affecting the nerve directly.
Okay.
And then the nerve is getting this input, all these impulses that are coming in, but what do they mean? What do these sounds have to do with anything? And when adults get the cochlear implant, they can tell us what their reactions are. So some of the things you hear is that it sounds like robotic, metallic, static, things like that. And that over time, that becomes more finessed and there's more meaning attached
because
to it.
The brain can filter it out.
The brain can filter it and is making sense of it. But I don't think anybody who's a cochlear implant user would say that it's natural if they had had hearing before. You know, someone who had lost their hearing in life. So for children, it is different, because if they're getting implanted early, then they're using the device and they still are taking advantage of their neuroplasticity to become rehabilitated with it. But important thing to remember is that if the implant is not working, the batteries die, if the cord breaks, you know, all the things that happen with our things, they're deaf. The child is deaf. The cochlear implant is not a cure. It doesn't restore hearing. And those are major misconceptions that we cover on the podcast. So
yeah, I never thought about it having a battery or something.
Yes, it's a whole.
So there's probably therapies and all kinds.
So many. Intensive.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So now we have pregnancy and birth, and now we've done the testing in the hospital. So or wherever the birth took place. Okay. So now, when you have a young child, what do you look out for? What are the most common things? Reasons maybe for, like we said, you know, tubes, temporary hearing loss. What should we, as parents, like you have little kids, what are you looking out for?
Okay, so at very young age, like under 2, then you're looking out for any of the ear infections. Your pediatrician is keeping an eye out on that, and that's one of the most common things you go to the doctor for at that age. But if they're happening very frequently, and you do antibiotics and then you get it again, you do antibiotics to get it again, or you know, that kind of cycle where it's becoming chronic, then those things can actually affect the hearing permanently. Whereas right now it's temporary. You need to clear out that fluid, because that space around the middle ear bones, the tiniest bones in the body, the hammer, the incus, the stapes, you know those little guys? Yeah, they're so tiny.
I think it was 10th grade biology.
Okay. They need to be in a fluid. They need to be in air. Naturally, there's air over there, and so that they can move. But if the whole thing is mucked up with this goopy, snotty, gross fluid, then it's harder for them to vibrate through. So the sounds are not getting in. That's called a conductive hearing loss, meaning that the hearing loss is affecting the sound's conduction in, one of those steps getting in. A sensory neural hearing loss is when the hearing loss is in the cochlea or in the nerve, and that's further on, and that is a permanent hearing loss. Whereas if it's conductive, it can be temporary. Sometimes there are fixes, but it can
my brain overloaded from
sorry. Let's start again.
I'm gonna we'll make So the from repeated ear infections, you're saying that there's temporary hearing loss, right? And then the one that you were just saying, I think, as I almost fell asleep,
sensory neural.
Yes,
it means it's the sensory.
So that was what somebody
nerve.
Might be born with. That doesn't come from ear infections.
Right. Okay, now just to confuse you a little bit further, sensory neural hearing loss is very common in older age, in the elderly. So as people age, the hair cells, the nerve cells start to disintegrate, to die, to wear out, and that's why older people will generally have hearing loss as they age.
And that is also why they say not to listen to music that's super, super loud, right?
Also true. Yes,
sensory
neural can be
overstimulating, so you're speeding up the aging process, right?
You're affecting the hair cells. In a bad way, negatively. So it's similar, but a little bit different.
Okay.
But both of them would be permanent. So in that way they're the same. Okay. So what you should be looking out for with your little kiddo, if they have a lot of ear infections, if their speech is delayed in any way, so around 18 months, they want to have 1, 2, 3 words. By 2, you really want to have some phrases or sentences. And if that's not going on, then definitely have speech evaluation. But a prerequisite to speech evaluation, at least it should be this way, is to get the hearing tested.
No, it is, because I had kids evaluated for autism and different things, and they always made me, that was part of, remember those 20 pages?
Yep.
That was part of it. Get a hearing test, get this. It was like, ah.
Yeah.
But it is important.
You want to rule that out,
Yeah.
or if it is what it is, identify it, and then you don't know how many times there's the story of a child who misbehaves, doesn't answer, is disruptive, and then that becomes behavioral. And then we find out they have a hearing loss. They have not been hearing the directions for the last 2 years.
Well, one of the signs of a kid that might have like ADHD is hyperfocus. So one of the things they say is, you know, you have a kid who's building with Legos, and you tell them it's time for lunch, and it's time for lunch, and then like again, it's time for lunch, and they're like, ah, as if you startled them, as if you woke them up, because they've been hyper-focused on the Legos, and they get really upset. Same thing could be with a hearing loss. How do you know which one it is? Obviously, there's more testing for both, but in order to rule it out, you really need to get that done. And it is a pain in the neck, but you feel better. I felt better knowing that it was not a hearing loss. It's a good thing.
Then as the children get a little older and more verbal, it's when they say, what, didn't hear you, what'd you say, you didn't call me.
A certain amount of what is just normal though.
Right, so that goes back to our ice cream test.
Right.
And then in the classroom, well, when they get into classroom age, then many times it's the teacher who identifies that everyone else has heard prize time, and your child didn't. So
Positive
what's
thing.
going on,
Ice
right?
cream,
Right.
prizes. Okay. Not like, you know, clean up your shoes and, you know, did you do your homework? What?
And by that time, you know, children older, 6, 7, 8, etc., then they can already start to say if things are bothering them. Yeah.
Right, because then they have something to compare it to. Right. Now, what about going back to the ears and ear infections and the goopiness? What are your thoughts on preventative, natural sorts of things? How can we help our kids not be goopy?
Yes. Okay, so the first thing we have to realize about ear infections and middle ear fluid is that the natural course of it is that it tends to clear up on its own. If you do nothing, likely it will clear up on its own within 4 to 6 weeks. If it doesn't, then we start doing treatments. So what happens is, because that's the natural cycle, we don't know if it's going to be, oh, this is the one that's going to clear up, or this is the one that needs treatment. When we don't know that at the beginning. So at the beginning, let's say you do the antibiotics and then it clears up, you say, yay, antibiotics worked. But you don't know, had you not done antibiotics, maybe that would have been the one that cleared. Same for, we had an ear infection, we cut out dairy, saw a chiropractor, used essential oils, and put in garlic cloves. Those are the things I've heard of. And it cleared up. So is it because of those interventions, or is it not? So that's why it's difficult to say. But what we do know is that once it's lasting more than 6 weeks and it's becoming too much time, and then at this point, now we're worried about the effect it's having on their language, the effect it's having on their balance, and the actual health of those bones. Because if they sit in that muck, they can actually become eroded over time. So we really don't want to just wait and see for 6 months.
Right.
Like 6 weeks, that's as much time as I personally am willing to give it. Like, okay, maybe 2 months. And also, let's say, is it the springtime or is it the wintertime? Because what causes this fluid is that it's backing up from the back of the throat, back of the nose, and coming up, because we have a eustachian tube. The eustachian tube connects the ear, nose, and throat, and that eustachian tube does this kind of opening and closing to clear, like when you pop your ears on an airplane or an elevator, like that's what's popping that eustachian tube. In children, that muscle isn't strong. It's most of the time it's collapsed. So it's hard for it to open. So what happens is that the stuff goes in, it gets backed up into the ear, and then the tube is stuck. So the fluid has nowhere to go, and it builds up there.
Because it's not moving as it should be when they would grow.
It's not letting it drain. It's not draining through the eustachian tube. So we want to try and open that eustachian tube. There's different ways, like forcing air in through the nose with this thing called an ear popper. That's one of the ways that people try. And so what happens is that if there's so much pressure building up, sometimes the eardrum bursts because it has to let out the pressure some way. And if you've gotten to a place where the eardrum is burst, now you're introducing all these medical complications. Like, people can heal from a hole in the eardrum, but sometimes they don't. And sometimes it needs to be surgically fixed. And so it was just, quote unquote, just an ear infection, and now it's become an eardrum burst or cholesteatoma or all these other bad things that can happen to the middle ear. So I'm a fan of trying whatever you want to try, but try it. If it doesn't work by 6 weeks, 8 weeks, okay, you want to go 3 months, then I'll just like hold my breath. Okay, 3 months, but definitely not to let it go on for longer than that. And if this is a chronically inflamed child, like they're always goopy, they breathe with their mouth open, these mouth breathers, they're always clogged up, their ears are always underwater, then this is a bigger issue. ENT will maybe look at tonsils, adenoids, like, so we can't just say, do the one natural option.
Have you seen that cutting out dairy or gluten or any of these things has helped in your experience?
So I think,
or garlic,
I mean, I've heard people say that that's worked for their child anecdotally, and I suspect that it is their child had a sensitivity to those things,
right?
And therefore they were inflamed in lots of places, and then that is the thing. But not, I wouldn't just go willy-nilly cutting out food groups.
No, but if you're, not that nobody should eat dairy or whatever it is.
Right.
But that, like, for example, okay.
So I'm saying go to an allergist. Find out if that's the case for you. That's what I mean.
So I had one of my kids, and when she was nursing, she just, we used to call her Piglet. Once I said, "Oh, where's Piglet?" And my 1.5-year-old's like, "She's downstairs."
So it just became the name. That's it.
Yeah, no, that was it. I changed it. I was like, oh, I thought I was talking to myself. So my little Piglet was very snorty while she was nursing.
Yeah.
And I cut out dairy in my food.
Interesting.
And cleared up absolutely immediately. And then we found out, later on in her life, every time she'd eat dairy, she could have one ice cream, but if it was like, that's it. She gets a cold instantly. Even now she's grown up and she still gets a cold if she eats
That's it. So it's self-experimentation. You want to try it out, go ahead. But don't let it drag on so that they're already getting the negative consequences of the thing that you're trying to avoid. That's my thoughts. Try anything. And if it works, I'm happy.
One of the things that you mentioned was balance, and we didn't talk about balance at all. So what can you say to balance and ears?
Okay, so our balance system is connected to our ears. The cochlea is snail-shaped. That's the hearing. Connected to that snail shape is very cool apparatus. It has a tube that goes this way up and down, a tube that goes this way side to side, and a tube that goes the third way, like up, down, side to side, front to back. Okay, so the three little tubes, one like this, one like this, one like this.
Okay.
And they're filled with fluid, a different kind of fluid, moving on from a good fluid that we need. And what that does, and little hair cells in there that are also, it's like a very, very sensitive, what is it called? It's in your phone. It's in a compass. It's this thing that tells you if things are up and down.
I could call my husband.
All right, you know what I'm talking about. We'll Google the word. So basically, the way that your phone, going over here for an analogy, the way that your phone knows if you're in upright or side to side, or all those games where you can move your car, and all those things. So there's a little thing in there that is like a little suspended ball. Thank you. That is probably what it is.
He was telling me about missiles and ballistic systems the other day.
There you go.
So, yes.
So we have that in our bodies.
Oh, that's cool.
So, yes. So we have these 3 semicircular canals. They're little half circles. And they can tell you if you're going forward and back, if you're going up and down, like sitting to standing.
That is interesting.
What's the other one again? Side to side.
Just
it takes me a second, right? Like an X, Y, and a Z, right? Like different axes in space. And so, what we do is we have 2 of them, one on each side, and they're always constantly in balance with each other. So when I turn my head, they're both turning, and that's sending signals to my brain, up my vestibular system. That's, my gaze also is involved, my eyes. So the eyes and the vestibular system are highly connected. There's a reflex going between them to make sure that your eyes are matching where your head is moving. And that when you're walking, you don't see the whole world jumping up and down, even though your head is physically going up and down.
Right.
So those are a whole nother kind of vestibular disorder.
And if anyone's ever been dizzy, had a dizzy spell, you know what it means when it's not working right.
That's exactly right. Anyone who has vertigo and the whole world seems like it's spinning, it's an imbalance of the fluid in those semicircular canals. And many times hearing and balance disorders go together because it is in the same exact structure. The cochlea and the semicircular canals share the same fluid.
Okay. So
that's another thing to look out for. Okay. If the child is constantly falling.
Okay. So if they're like learning how to walk or something and they're tipping over, or even at a different age, if they're having balance, any sort of balance issues, to get their hearing checked, then you would go to
get
the
their
same
hearing
thing?
checked, but also audiologists are also vestibular diagnosticians. So we do a lot of testing also to check the balance, the health of the vestibular system.
What can you do? Just obviously it's huge, but just in a nutshell, what can you do when somebody has a balance problem? And is it related to the fluid buildup, like we're saying? Like, okay,
No,
back up.
different fluid.
If someone is born with no hearing, that has nothing to do with their balance, then, right?
It can. So it goes back again to some
Okay.
children can have just hearing loss and
Okay.
be deaf but typical every other way.
Yes.
And some will have both because it's affecting the system bigger. Yeah.
Okay, because it's kind of two systems that coexist in the same place,
Correct.
but it seems like they work kind of independently.
They can be independent, yeah.
Okay.
Doesn't
but if the
necessarily
child is having like tubes and they're having ear infections and they're having, stuffy nose, that probably won't affect their balance.
Right, different place. Because that's the middle ear, not connected to the inner ear.
Okay.
But it might affect their perception of balance through a different system, which is our proprioception, like where our body is in space.
Okay.
And that is affected by our hearing because we're looking out for what sounds there are.
Mm-hmm.
All these different overlapping circles.
How interesting.
Yeah, so there's rehab that's from physical therapy, because the problems can also be muscular, neuromuscular. If someone is falling over, it doesn't mean they have a vestibular problem. It could be that their muscles are weak or they don't have tone and all of that. So physical therapists and audiologists also work together in this space.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's like interdisciplinary is my favorite part of this profession, because I have what to say when I speak to speech therapists and what to say when I speak with physical therapists and what to say when I speak to ENTs and pediatricians and doulas and just anybody I want to talk to you about audiology.
It also sounds like the parent is having a child dealing with some hearing loss. They're going to be dealing with a whole bunch of different people that they didn't even know exist. How many of you knew there were audiologists in the world? Like, I didn't know until I met Lilach. Right?
One of the things that happens when you have a child with any out of the ordinary thing, even small things, but especially big things, is that you become the team leader, captain, chief, advocate, binder person.
Right.
And if, that's also a process. That's a becoming that advocate, that parent, when you just want to be a mom, like that whole thing. That's a big process. There's grief there. There's empowerment that comes hopefully through that. And I think knowing what's going on, having data, having education, having a diagnosis, whatever it may be, those are helpful, positive things in the right direction. And children are really resilient. Children are as open to love and success and like all the great things. They just want stability and love, like all the things that are going on around them. That's how I think. If they see that someone's in control, if they see that there's a purpose, all these appointments can be crazy, but they can also be adventurous, in the perspective of the child. So it's a lot.
And also a child who has, let's say, is born deaf. I mean, they've never heard. So their world is wonderful to them. And if you're looking at them, just like any loss that our children have, instead of thinking, why can't they be like everybody else, making their world amazing. I mean, I had a friend in high school whose sister was deaf, and she was so smart. And she actually was in a regular classroom because she read lips perfectly. And there was once the kids in her class just didn't believe that she had hearing loss. They just couldn't believe it. So somebody went up right behind her and like screamed as loud as they could. She didn't hear things. She didn't react because she was just like everybody else. And whenever there's an issue with our child, we always think, what's going to be with them? Are they going to have friends? We're starting to like the situation could be fine right now, but what's going to be down the road? Are they going to get married? Are they going to have a life? Like, it'll be okay.
Yeah.
This is their story, and their story is going to be amazing. And calming down and just taking those steps.
Yeah.
And finding the All About Audiology podcast. And Dr. Lilach,
advocacy tools. That's why the work that I do now is to support parents. Yeah. Because the children need a lot of support and hopefully are getting all the services they need. But the parents need it too. Parents need to be held and helped and guided. And I worried that piece was missing in a lot of the families I interacted with.
You're like a hearing loss doula.
You can say that, I guess.
Amazing. Okay, so the time has flown by.
Yes. The presents. We need to tell them.
The present. We're going to give them the present. And I just have a question first for you. Oh, you know what? Let's just take a moment to talk about why they're getting this present. We haven't even talked about.
I know. We never got into it.
We need another hour,
yes.
right? Okay, so let's touch very quickly on meditation and sound for us.
Yes. So one of the things I'm very passionate about that has helped me a lot in my life and through my pregnancies, and continues to help me, is meditation. And it's a hot topic right now, which is very great. I'm sure you've heard about it already, but I think there's like this fear that meditation is like all up here, woo woo, and we don't, like, inaccessible. You have to be all like a Zen master or whatever. But actually, it's as simple as just being aware of the present moment and of what's happening around you, both outside of you and inside of you. And one of the ways we connect to the world is through our senses, and hearing being one of them, the one I am very connected to. So when we take a deliberate moment, even 30 seconds, to notice what are the sounds around us, what streams are happening. So you're going to start to hear the traffic in the distance, and you're going to start to hear the ticking of a clock if you have one, and the AC is making noise, and someone walked by so you heard their footsteps, and the neighbor's dog made noise. And so the more you just stop and listen, you'll actually hear that there's way more things that are available to you, accessible to you through your ears, than you noticed a moment before.
It's kind of like what you were saying, that we're born with everything and we have to filter it.
Right.
So we naturally are filtering things so that we're not overwhelmed with sound.
Exactly. Because how annoying would it be if I heard all those things while I'm trying to read or trying to cook or whatever? So we have to do that, and that's a survival mechanism. That's totally true. But we are also missing out on just being a receiver, because that's what we are. We receive all the sounds, and if we pay attention to them, then that gives us a little bit of space and a little bit of clarity to move away all the cobweb thoughts that are sometimes spiraling for all of us, and just be right here, right now, without any agenda, just to listen. And when that happens, when we're able to tune into what's around us, also through other senses, feeling grounded in the chair, what temperature does my skin feel? Am I cool or hot? Is there a difference between one hand to the other hand? Like, when you start to do this kind of process, and I'm saying it quickly, which is not how you would go through it. Right. It would be like much more calm. Yeah. But it's actually very good for me, because it counterbalances this energy that I have, this go, 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 talk a mile a minute. So it helps me to come back. What's the message? What am I trying to say? So when we can do that for what's going on outside, then it helps to start to do that on what's happening inside, to do one thought at a time. Like you were just saying, this person texted me. Why? They texted me this. Why? What were they thinking? And why did they say that? And who else knows about this? And you already have like 800 questions, but it's like, wait a minute. They texted me. I received a text. This is what the text physically says. Like, these are the words. Nothing more, nothing less. I don't know what they were thinking. I don't know what their goal was. I just have the words. And before we build all these stories around something that happens, this, or similar to getting a diagnosis, like you said also. My child has this diagnosis. They're never going to have friends. They're never going to succeed. They won't go to college. What? Who said? Hold on. They're 3 months old.
I had a whole conversation the other day. It wasn't hearing loss, but it was another significant issue. And it was kind of similar to one of the things my kids went through. So this random woman who sort of knows me, kind of met her on the street, and she just started tumbling out. And she wanted to make major life decisions for her child. Mm-hmm. So I was like, okay, let's back up. What are you feeling? What is the teacher saying? What's going on? And I tried to help her through this thing that I've learned is, okay, everything that is in the past is over. Okay, it's gone. It might even be your imagination, because if two people are at the same event, they're both going to remember it differently. So everything that's happened, it's ignore it. She was fine with that part. And then I said, right now, are you okay? with this diagnosis, this situation, this potential, are you okay right now? She's like, yeah, it's all good right now. Okay, so now we're talking about the future. The future hasn't happened yet. Anything could change. Things could be invented. I mean, like Mashiach could come, Bezrat Hashem, anything could happen. Your whole life. We had the other day, I took my daughter out and my son was home and he was fixing something and something else caught on fire and we had a fire. And thank God everyone's fine and everything. But when you have a fire, everything shifts perspective. So the thing that was annoying me wasn't annoying me anymore. Something else was annoying me. That's fine. It all shifted around, right? So, but those are your imagination. Anything could change. Don't build. And once we were able to get back to focus, forget about the future. It hasn't happened yet. Anything can change. Forget about the past. It's over anyways. It doesn't matter. Are you okay now? What's your decision now? What's your best decision now? What's your next step now? And she just calmed down and she was able to make her decision and think about it. And it was great. I mean, I was so grateful to have learned that tool. Absolutely. When you're hit with a diagnosis or you have to make a lot of different decisions with your child's health, in the moment. Yeah. Take a deep breath and get in the moment, you know?
I remember in being pregnant that it was intensely a time when you had to be more present. Because I could go through the whole future, but you just don't know. So you have to just come back to your heartburn, to being so large that you can't sit, and like you just are actually forced many times back into that space. That was my experience.
And also the wonder of like feeling your baby kick and move inside of you. And it's almost like you want to be in that moment because you're not worrying about who are they going to be and what grade they're getting on a test. You're just like there. I remember these pregnancy groups, because whenever I'm pregnant, I like to go online and get like support groups and everything, you know, and find out exactly what's happening every week and every day. And you hear these ladies saying, I just want to have my baby already so I can stop worrying.
Good one.
That's really good.
That's really funny.
Right? I heard that over and over and over. And there I was, I think it was like baby number 6 and these new moms.
Yeah.
So okay, that's when it all started.
I don't come to say that like, oh, start meditating and you will be good to go for the rest of your life. It's more a tool and something that you can have.
It's really
practice. And it's practice.
It doesn't mean you have to be sitting there like, ooh, you know, om or something. Guided meditation.
Very helpful.
We're talking, we're walking you through the steps, listening to, like Lilach has prepared, this is the gift, right? She has prepared a guided meditation for you, where you're just going to listen to the sound of her voice, and she's going to focus your attention onto different sounds and different experiences. And I listen to it. It's amazing. And you just relax and go through it. And it's very restorative. Yeah. It really, like, we have an inner world. I mean, I didn't tell my body how to make my babies. Did you?
I couldn't have known a thing where to start, right?
I didn't tell my body how to hear. I don't even know like half the words that you just said, right? Our bodies are doing these things all by themselves. It's huge. There's a huge stuff going on. So when we can take that time to stop and just be guided through this relaxation process, and everything sort of calms down, and then our bodies know what to do. You know, we're giving them a vacation, and it's free. You don't have to like go to the Hilton or something, you know. And this is particularly free because this is a present. So there's going to be a link below,
allaboutaudiology.com/Geula Mamas. It's just for you guys.
That's right. But I don't mind if you share, right?
No, absolutely.
Because if people, you know, you can share it because then people will know about Geula Mamas. They'll be able to get more information, and they'll know about all about audiology, and they'll be able to get that information. So we are here. We're here to like help everyone in Am Yisrael, and like I don't know, bring the Geula at the same time.
That would be nice,
you know, right? Like it's okay. You can share it. Okay. So before we go, question. First of all, I have to say another thing. This is so funny. This is not the first time we recorded this podcast.
Technical difficulties.
Lilach was here a long time ago. Lilach was supposed to be one of, I don't know, months ago. Yeah. This is supposed to be one of the first podcasts because we've been working together and growing our businesses and trying to help people together and learning all this technology together. And this is so funny. We recorded the whole thing They're gonna crack up.
It was so fun though.
It was so fun. But what happened?
It was fun again.
It was fun again.
What happened?
What happened was the whole thing was recorded, of all things,
With no audio.
With no audio. So good.
I'm really
Hashem
happy.
has such a good sense of humor.
It is funny, yeah.
Never had it with any other podcast. This show was recorded and the audio didn't work. Totally perfect video file, no audio at all. Couldn't hear a thing. Really, really fascinating.
It's so nice we can laugh about it. I mean, we laughed about it then too. It was
I
fine.
know. Well, after we were like, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" That can't be. So it's good. It's been even more fun the second time around. It's great. It's wonderful.
I mean, that's going to happen. And that's going to happen in life, in pregnancy, in babies, in child rearing. Yeah. Things are not going to go the way you want them to. That's just, let's be upfront about that.
Yeah.
And the only thing you can do is be with it, ride the waves. Same as
but it's just funny that the All About Audiology podcast show had no audio. I mean, come on. That's just funny.
Yes.
That's funny.
It worked out.
Yeah, it's good. It gave us another excuse to stop all the things we're doing and get together. So I'm happy. Okay, so I have a question for you.
Yes.
So don't forget about what you answered months ago, because I don't think you remembered anyways. Yes. Stop.
I'm ready.
And I'll give you a little extra. Listen to the birds.
Okay.
I never said that before. Imagine that you're at Har Sinai and you have all the neshama of all the women who are ever going to be born, ever come into this world and be moms and have kids, and everybody is before you. And now you're listening to the birds chirping and all the beautiful sounds of nature and the cars, or the horns beeping and all the other things going on. Okay. So you're imagining all these lovely ladies in front of you, and you, Dr. Lilach Saperstein, who's here with us today, from your heart, what would you like to tell them? Just one thing. Whatever.
Okay. The thing that I am having come for me is that you have all the tools and all the resources to do what you were put here to do. It's all right there inside of you and available to you. If it's not inside of you, you can get it. It's there. So all the strength and all the compassion and all the empathy and all the willpower, everything that you need for your life right now, you have it. It's there for you. So go and get it.
I'm also thinking all the technology, like we make the best decisions that we can in the moment with the tools that we have, with the life experience and the wisdom and the tools we have today. No one is ever expected to do things, lo b'shamayim hi. Like you're not expected to do something that's across the ocean. You have what you need, both physically and you're saying emotionally.
Yes. You have it even when you don't know you have it. And if you need something else that you don't think you have, then you have the power to go and get that from whoever is going to give it to you. If that's seeing a therapist, if it's getting help from a specific specialist in a clinician, whatever it is that is the niche problem or issue that you're facing, then there's someone out there who knows what you can do and what you need. So that's really powerful. That's a big lesson that I have felt very empowered by. You're not alone, and you're not like misken. You have
English
what you
is
need.
missing.
I know, it's so weird.
Misken is like poor you.
Yeah.
Right? It's not poor you. And you know what? The things that we are struggling with are what makes us special and unique and flavorful and makes us who we are. I mean, we draw out these energies that we didn't know we had.
Yeah.
And then we're just so much more interesting people, afterwards. I love sometimes when you just randomly, like in Israel, I know at a bus stop, you can just have an entire deep conversation with anybody.
Yeah.
And it's one of my favorite things because people on the outside look pretty boring, and it looks like you could just judge them. No, on the outside, really, or like we're talking about hearing loss. Okay.
Some people look pretty interesting.
But it doesn't look like you can sort of read them and you know everything about them. Yeah, that's that kind of person. You can pigeonhole them,
You don't know anything.
You know anything. And the things that they like that they've been through. I mean, that's what makes us just really awesome,
Yeah.
you know? So like not being afraid of that. Say, okay, if this is the situation I have, then I can do this. I don't know how I can do this today. You're allowed to panic. You're allowed to, you know, like freak out a little bit.
Right,
You're
right.
human.
Yeah, and then
But
when you've done that and you've
Yeah.
felt it and you've gone through it, now move it towards action. Move it towards advocacy.
Because
Move it
saying I
towards-
can't, saying I don't know how, saying
Yeah.
this is too big, this is those kinds of things are not helpful.
Mhm.
They're not helpful. And saying to yourself, no, I can do this. I don't know how yet. I don't know how yet, but I know oftentimes what I need to do today.
Right.
And what my next step is.
Yeah.
I think of it sometimes like following the breadcrumbs, you know, like with Hansel and Gretel. You know, like you don't really know how you're going to get to the house, but you can see the next breadcrumb. Okay, so we're going to make this appointment and we're going to wait and see. And the thing that gets us into a tailspin is like, okay, well, what if they say my kid, you know, it's not curable? And what if they say they need this? And what if they say, stop. No more what ifs, right? Take the next step. And if your thing is hearing loss, listen to the All About Audiology podcast, right?
We'll be happy to have you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for listening.
And remember that I love you. Goodbye.